Part 1. The calm of the evening beginning. The scene of Anne stood alone by his window, gazing out at the view as the light of the evening faded. The sun had almost dipped behind the mountain range in the distance, leaving the sky painted in soft shades of orange and deep purple. The air was settling into the coolness of dusk, and the warm golden light gently spread across the landscape, casting long shadows over the quiet village. His village, tucked away in a small valley, was surrounded by rolling hills and a dense forest. It was a place where time seemed to slow, where the rush of the outside world couldn't quite reach. The houses were small, simple, made of wood, with vibrant gardens, and the air was always filled with the scent of fresh earth and greenery. This was the world Evan had chosen, a world that felt at peace with itself. He enjoyed these moments, standing in the quiet of the evening, watching as the world slowed and the light faded. The transition from day to night always brought a sense of serenity, as if the world was preparing for rest, just as he did after a long day's work. His life was simple. He worked with his hands, crafting tools for the village, nothing too busy or demanding, but fulfilling nonetheless. But what truly mattered to Evan were the moments like this one, when he could step outside, breathe deeply, and reconnect with the calmness of the world around him. A small decision today was no different from any other, yet something felt a little different tonight. Maybe it was the way the wind had shifted, or how the last light of the sun bathed everything in a warm glow. Evan could feel a subtle pull to go out, to walk beyond the familiar edges of his home, and discover something more, something deeper. He gazed out the window once more, then decided, without hesitation, to step outside. He pulled on a light jacket and left the house, closing the door gently behind him. The air outside was crisp, with a hint of coolness from the approaching night, but it felt refreshing. The world around him was quiet, save for the rustling of leaves and the distant chirp of a bird. Evan took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs. The scent of pine and damp earth wrapped around him, grounding him in the moment. This was what he craved, moments like this, where he could leave behind the clutter of the world and simply exist in the calmness of nature. The path into the forest Evan didn't have a clear destination in mind as he stepped onto the dirt path that led into the forest. It was a familiar trail, one he had walked countless times, but tonight it felt different. The moon, which had just begun to rise, cast a soft, silvery light, illuminating the path ahead. The trees seemed to reach out to him, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, creating patterns on the ground like a natural work of art. The path, covered with fallen leaves, wound its way deeper into the forest, inviting him to venture further. With each step, Evan felt more connected to the natural world around him. The forest, with its quiet rhythms and ancient presence, was a place of refuge, a place where the noise of the world couldn't reach him. The longer he walked, the more he felt the burdens of the day melt away. The rustling of leaves, the soft murmur of the wind through the trees, the distant sound of a stream, of these elements seemed to calm his mind and spirit. There was something soothing in the way the forest breathed, as if it was alive with energy, yet at the same time perfectly still. Evan found peace in this stillness, in the gentle rhythm of nature's pulse. The moon's guidances. Evan walked deeper into the woods. He noticed the moonlight shining through the gaps in the branches above. The light filtered through the leaves, casting shadows and creating a magical, dreamlike atmosphere. The world around him seemed to transform with the moon's glow. What had once been a familiar path now seemed mysterious, inviting him into a deeper sense of wonder. He paused for a moment, closing his eyes and letting the gentle breeze wash over him. The cool air felt refreshing against his skin, and the calmness of the forest seemed to embrace him. He felt as though he had entered a different realm, one that was free of time, free of worry, and free of the chaos that often clouded his thoughts. The moonlight, soft and constant, felt like a companion on this quiet journey. It was as though the moon itself was guiding him, showing him the way not with words, but with its steady, unwavering light. In that moment, Evan felt safe and grounded, as though the whole of nature was offering him a sense of peace that was beyond anything he could put into words. Part 2. The gentle walk as Evan continued his journey through the forest. The path beneath his feet seemed to grow softer, more familiar with each step. The gentle crunch of dried leaves echoed beneath him, a natural rhythm that felt calming and reassuring. The forest around him was coming alive in its own way, but it was not the loud, boisterous activity one might expect from a thriving ecosystem. Instead, it was a quieter kind of life, a slower, more deliberate existence that seemed to exist in perfect harmony with the stillness of the evening. The air had grown cooler as the sun dipped lower, and a breeze rustled the leaves above each. Gusts seemed to carry a whisper, as though the trees were sharing their secrets with him. The scent of damp earth and pine filled his lungs, and Evan couldn't help but smile, knowing how rare it was for him to be here, in this moment, surrounded by the quiet whispers of nature. It was a peace unlike any he had ever experienced in the hustle of the outside world. Evan's footsteps began to slow as he took in the beauty of the forest. The trees towered above him, their trunks thick and gnarled with age, their leaves rustling in the wind. The light from the moon, now higher in the sky, filtered through the canopy, casting a soft silver glow across the path. The woods seemed alive with shadows and light, and Evan marveled at how the darkness wasn't something to be feared. Here it was simply a part of the night, blending seamlessly with the quiet glow of the moonlight. As he walked deeper into the woods, Evan noticed a slight change in the air, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that made the forest feel even more intimate. It was as if the trees themselves were drawing him closer, encouraging him to continue down the winding path. Each turn seemed to bring him further from the world he knew, closer to a world that was timeless, where time itself seemed to slow down, allowing him to simply be. The forests embraced the deeper Evan ventured into the woods, the more he felt a connection with the land around him. It was not a connection he could put into words, but it was something that resonated within him, like the pulse of the earth itself. With each step, he felt more at home here, more at peace with himself. The forest seemed to embrace him, wrapping him in its ancient rhythm, and he allowed himself to be carried along with it. Trusting the journey, he came to a large clearing where the trees parted to reveal a small meadow bathed in moonlight. The grasses were tall and swayed gently in the breeze, and Evan paused for a moment to take it all in. The world seemed to stand still in this moment, and Evan felt as though the entire universe had opened up to him. In that meadow, surrounded by the quiet hum of the forest, there was a sense of calmness he had never experienced before. The breeze picked up slightly, and Evan felt it brush against his skin, cool and refreshing. He looked up, his gaze shifting between the vast canopy of trees above him and the sky stretching out in all directions. The stars were beginning to appear, twinkling faintly in the dark expanse. The moon was bright, casting a soft glow on everything, It touched. Evan felt himself drawn to the heart of the meadow, where the moonlight illuminated a small, clear stream. It wound its way through the grass, its surface shimmering in the light. The water flowed gently, creating ripples as it moved over the smooth stones beneath. The sound was soft but constant, a calming presence that seemed to echo the peace within Evan's heart. It was as if the forest had brought him here for this very moment, to allow him to reconnect with something deeper than he could understand. The sound of water even slowly approached the stream, his feet sinking softly into the cool earth as he knelt by the water's edge. He stretched out his hand, dipping his fingers into the stream. The water was cold and refreshing, sending a jolt of sensation up his arm. He closed his eyes for a moment, just listening to the gentle flow of the stream, the sound of the water flowing over rocks and pebbles. It was a sound so natural, so perfect, that Evan found himself lost in it, the way you might lose yourself in the rhythm of a heartbeat. As he sat there, his fingers resting in the water, Evan felt his body relax even further. There was no need to rush, no need to go anywhere. The world beyond this moment simply didn't matter. It was as though time had stopped for him here. Every breath he took felt deeper, fuller, like he was truly experiencing the world for the first time. The night around him seemed to pulse with life, and for the first time in a long while, Evan felt completely in sync with the world around him. His worries, the demands of everyday life, all of it faded into the background. Here, in the quiet forest, surrounded by the gentle sounds of nature, there was no place for stress, no room for anxiety. He let out a long sigh, and for a moment, he wondered if this was what true peace felt like, if this was the kind of quiet the world was meant to offer. Evan had always searched for balance, but never had he felt so aligned with himself and with nature as he did now. A moment of stillness. Evan stayed there for what felt like hours. Sitting by the stream, his thoughts slowly fading away, he didn't feel the need to think about the past or the future, only about this moment. The softness of the earth beneath him, the clear water flowing past, and the gentle sound of the wind moving through the trees. The world felt far away, and Evan could finally just be. He leaned back against a nearby tree, the bark cool against his skin, and closed his eyes. The rhythmic sounds of the forest surrounded him, the whispering wind, the soft babble of the stream, the occasional chirp of a distant bird or rustle of leaves. It was a perfect symphony of nature, one that calmed his mind and soothed his heart in that stillness. Evan found something unexpected, a sense of renewal. He realized that all along he had been searching for peace, not in grand gestures or busy achievements, but in moments like this. It wasn't something that could be forced or rushed. It was something that had to be felt, quietly and deeply, like the gentle flow of the stream at his side. He stayed there for a long time, letting the night wash over him, until eventually, the soft call of the wind and the trickling of the water lulled him into a sense of drowsiness. With a final deep breath, Evan stood up, stretching his legs and giving the stream one last glance before he slowly turned back toward the forest path. Part 3. The quiet stream, the gentle flow of the stream. Evan stood at the edge of the stream, feeling the cool, clear water run through his fingers. He could hear it softly rushing over the smooth stones, its gentle murmurs like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. The sound was soothing, filling the air with a peaceful melody that seemed to bring everything into balance. For a moment, Evan could only focus on the water as it flowed, winding its way through the forest. He allowed himself to be lost in the sound, in the moment, and let everything else fade away. The stream wasn't just a body of water. It was alive, moving with purpose and rhythm. Its clear surface reflected the moonlight, and the shimmering light seemed to dance on the water, casting delicate patterns on the stones beneath. The current was steady and gentle, each ripple and wave a reminder of the quiet persistence of nature. Evan watched as the water swirled around the rocks, carrying with it the leaves that had fallen from the trees above. Evan sat down beside the stream, his legs stretched out before him, the cool earth pressing against his palms. He looked at the way the water weaved its path through the forest, winding around boulders, flowing under branches that had fallen from the trees. The scene felt timeless, as though nothing had changed here for centuries. The stream had been flowing long before Evan had ever stepped into the forest, and it would continue flowing long after he left. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm of the water wash over him, and he felt his body relax, tension slowly dissolving, as if the stream were pulling it away. The peacefulness of the moment seemed to sink deeper into his soul. Here, beside the quiet stream, there was no past, no future, only the present, only the flow of the water and the breath of the wind. The connection with nature. Evan took a deep breath, his chest expanding as he inhaled the crisp, cool air. The smell of earth and pine surrounded him, grounding him to this place, to this very moment. He had always found comfort in nature, its constancy, its simplicity, and its ability to bring him back to himself. But tonight, as he sat by the stream, he felt something deeper than just comfort. He felt a profound connection to the world. Around him, the trees, the water, the wind, they weren't separate from him. They were a part of him as much as his own heartbeat. As Evan listened to the stream, he thought about how life often felt like a rush, a never-ending pursuit of goals, of success, of progress. But in this moment, everything felt different. There was no rush here. The water didn't hurry to reach. The ocean, it moved at its own pace, a pace that seemed perfect in its own way. The wind didn't fight against the trees. It simply passed through, caressing their leaves. And in this forest, Evan felt as though he had found a place where time wasn't something to chase, it was something to live with, to move with. He looked around, noticing the way the moonlight illuminated the path the stream took, casting a gentle glow over everything it touched. The forest around him was filled with life, but it was the quiet, steady kind of life, the kind that didn't demand attention but simply was. He could hear the faint rustle of the leaves, the distant chirping of an owl, the gentle hum of insects in the air. All of it combined into a symphony of peace that calmed his mind and soothed his soul. Evan reached down and picked up a small stone from the stream here, turned it over in his hand, feeling its smooth surface and cool temperature. He tossed the stone back into the water, watching as it skipped across the surface before sinking into the depths below. It was such a simple action, but it felt symbolic, a reminder that life, like the stone, can skip across the surface or sink into the depths, but it always continues to move forward. A moment of reflection. The stream, with its constant movement, had a way of making Evan reflect. As he sat there, watching the water flow, he thought about the path his life had taken. He had always been the type to avoid confrontation, to take the quieter route. He had spent his days working, living simply, always trying to find peace in the small things. But tonight, as he watched the stream, he realized that peace wasn't something he needed to search for, it was something he needed to allow to happen. The world, he thought, was like the stream, ever-moving, ever-changing, yet always present. There was no need to struggle against it. Instead, he could learn to move with it, to let go of the expectations and pressures that so often weighed on him. The water never fought the rocks. It simply flowed around them, finding its way forward. In the same way, he could find his own path, one that didn't require resistance, but rather acceptance of the natural flow of life. Evan closed his eyes again, allowing the thoughts to drift away, just as the water carried the leaves downstream. He didn't need to have all the answers right now. He didn't need to have everything figured out. In this moment, he realized it was enough to simply be present, to sit by the stream and allow the peace of the forest to wash over him. Sometimes, he thought, that's all we really need, space to simply be. The first signs of dawn, the night had deepened, and the cool air wrapped around Evan like a soft blanket. The quiet rhythm of the stream continued its steady song, but now a subtle change was beginning to take place. The first light of dawn was on the horizon, softening the darkness, hinting at the arrival of a new day. Evan could feel the shift in the air, a new energy, one that brought with it the promise of another beginning. He stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the night lift from his shoulders. As he looked toward the east, where the first light of dawn was beginning to creep over the horizon, he felt a sense of anticipation, a sense of readiness for whatever the day might bring. He wasn't in a rush to leave this peaceful spot, but he knew that he couldn't stay forever. The world would call to him, and he would return to it renewed, refreshed, and with a deeper sense of connection to both himself and the world around him. Before he left, he took one last look at the stream, watching as the light of dawn began to dance across its surface. The moon was beginning to fade, and the world was shifting from night to day. Evan felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the time he had spent here, and a deep sense of peace that he knew would stay with him as he left this place. As he turned to head back toward the forest path, Evan knew that the journey was far from over. He had found something important tonight, something he would carry with him, something as simple and yet as profound as the quiet flow of the stream. Part 4. The Light of the Moon, a path revealed by moonlight. Evan walked deeper into the forest. The moon now fully risen, casting a silver glow over everything it touched. The shadows from the trees stretched long across the ground, their dark forms becoming twisted shapes in the soft light. The forest had changed. It felt more alive, more present than ever before, as if the world around him was waking up in the stillness of the night. Every step Evan took seemed to lead him further into the heart of this ancient forest, a place that felt both timeless and eternal. He could hear the occasional rustle of a distant creature, but it was all in harmony with the gentle night sounds. The wind whispered through the trees, the leaves shifting with the breeze, as if the forest itself was breathing alongside him. The moonlight illuminated his path, transforming the forest into a world of contrast, brilliant whites and deep blacks, shadows and light. The trees, with their thick trunks and towering canopies, formed a protective embrace around him, and yet there was a sense of vastness here that made him feel both small and connected to everything. The path ahead wound through the trees, the way forward lit by the moon's steady light. Evan felt a pull to continue, a sense of calm guiding his steps. There was something deeply soothing about the moon's presence, constant and steady, hanging high above, never wavering. He marveled at the way the light fell through the gaps in the branches, highlighting the texture of the bark, the soft green of the moss, and the gentle curves of the rocks on the forest floor. The moon as a guide. As Evan walked deeper into the forest, he began to feel the subtle pull of the moon above, as though it was guiding him, leading him towards something unknown yet familiar. There was something about the way the light shifted with each step that made him feel like he was being gently steered along a path, as though the forest itself had a plan for him. It wasn't that the forest was strange or alien to him. Him had walked through these woods many times. But tonight, everything seemed different. The moonlight seemed to speak to him in its own quiet way. It illuminated his path, not just physically, but emotionally, guiding him through the shadows of his thoughts and fears. There was a quiet strength in the moon, a silent confidence that inspired trust. Evan walked slowly, savoring each step, each breath of cool, fresh air. He was not in a hurry. There was no destination he was rushing toward, no urgency to get somewhere. He simply followed the path, feeling the earth beneath his feet, the gentle breeze against his face, and the soft glow of the moon above. It was as if time had slowed down. Or maybe it was that Evan had finally learned how to truly be present. In this space, he didn't need to worry about the future or dwell on the past. All that mattered was the present moment, the moon, the forest, and the quiet peace that enveloped him. The quiet of the forest, the deeper Evan ventured, the quieter the world seemed to become. The noises of the day had long faded, and in their place there was a profound stillness. The wind whispered through the trees, but it was soft, almost reverent, as if the forest was speaking to him in a language he could only understand when he truly listened. There were no distractions, here no phone calls, no deadlines, no bustling crowds, just the rhythm of his footsteps and the gentle rustling of the leaves. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and Evan closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, feeling his lungs fill with the pure, clean air. The night was cool but not cold, and it carried with it a quiet sense of peace that settled into his bones. He realized how rare these moments were in the world he had left behind, where everything moved so quickly and there was always something that needed to be done. But here, in the moonlit forest, there was nothing to rush for. There was no urgency, no expectations. It was a place that allowed him to simply exist, without the need to constantly prove his worth or his purpose. The forest, the moon, the night, they all accepted him as he was. It was as though nature itself was offering him an unspoken invitation to let go of everything and just be. A deeper connection. As Evan continued to walk, he began to notice more details around him. The delicate silver glow of the moon on the leaves, the intricate patterns formed by the shadows on the ground, the way the trees stood tall and firm, yet somehow seemed to bend slightly toward each other, as if in quiet conversation. The longer he walked, the more he felt his connection to this place, his connection to the earth itself, growing stronger. It wasn't just the beauty of the forest that captivated him. It was the way the forest seemed to understand him, as though it knew what he needed before he even realized it himself. Every step he took, every breath he drew, felt like a step toward something deeper, something more profound than he had experienced before. Evan had always felt a sense of peace in nature, but tonight the peace was deeper, more complete. It was as though the forest had opened a door within him, allowing him to see parts of himself he had long neglected. There were no distractions here, no noise to drown out his thoughts. The only sounds were those of the forest, gentle, reassuring, and constant. The moon, as a companion, the moon above continued to guide him, its light unwavering and steady. It felt like an old friend, silent, constant, and always there when needed. Evan couldn't help but feel that the moon wasn't just illuminating his path, it was illuminating his heart, shining light on the parts of him that had been in the shadows for so long. He thought about how often he had struggled with his own doubts and fears. How often he had rushed through life, always thinking about the next step, the next goal, the next achievement. But tonight, under the quiet gaze of the moon, Evan realized that none of that mattered. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He didn't need to be anywhere or do anything. All he needed to do was walk, breathe, and be. For the first time in a long time, Evan felt at peace with himself. There was no pressure, no rush. There was only the moonlight, the forest, and the steady rhythm of his steps as he walked deeper into the night. It was a kind of peace he had been searching for, without even knowing it. A peace that didn't come from external achievements or validation, but from within. The journey continues eventually. Evan reached a clearing in the forest, where the moonlight bathed the ground in a soft, silvery glow. He paused for a moment, taking in the beauty around him. The trees stood like sentinels, their dark trunks rising toward the sky, their leaves shimmering in the moonlight. The world felt expansive and yet intimate, as though he was standing at the center of something timeless. He sat down on a large rock in the center of the clearing, feeling the cool stone beneath him. The night was perfect still, quiet and full of possibility. As he gazed up at the sky, he felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. The stars twinkled faintly in the distance, and the moon shone bright, as if watching over him. For the first time in a long time, Evan felt that everything was exactly as it should be. There was no need for more. There was no need for anything else. In this moment, with the moon above and the forest around him, Evan knew he had found the peace he had been searching for all along. Part 5. The Restful Night, the Arrival of Dawn. The night was deep, but Evan could feel the first stirrings of the morning's approach, though it was still hours away. The cool air of the forest settled around him as he sat on the rock in the clearing. He had been here for what felt like an eternity. Yet it was also as if time had simply slipped away, leaving him in a timeless state of peace. His thoughts were slow, calm, and undemanding, like the ripples on the stream. The forest felt more like a home than a place he'd just arrived at. The stillness around him was not empty, but filled with life in its most quiet and undisturbed. Evan stood up after a long while, his muscles stiff from sitting, but not from discomfort. He stretched slowly, his body moving like water fluid and unhurried. The cool air kissed his face and neck, and he breathed deeply, taking it in, feeling every inch of his being awaken. The moon was still there, its soft light casting gentle shadows on the ground. He could feel its pull, its calming presence, like a guiding hand on his back, leading him forward. With a final glance back at the clearing, he began walking back down the same path he had come. There was no rush, no desire to reach a destination. The journey itself had become the purpose. Each step, each breath, was a part of the ongoing process of being. His feet tread softly on the earth, the familiar sounds of the forest accompanying him, the rustling of the leaves, the faint chirping of a bird hidden in the branches, the distant murmur of the stream. Everything felt balanced and complete. A moment of reflection as he walked, Evan allowed his thoughts to drift. The clarity he had experienced by the stream had stayed with him, and now, in the quiet of the early morning, it seemed to deepen. The forest, in its vastness, had shown him something profound about himself. The peacefulness he had found here was not something external, it was a reflection of what had always been within him. The moonlight, the gentle breeze, the rustling trees, they had all been invitations to remember who he was, who he had always been. He had merely forgotten in the busyness of life. Evan realized that the answer to his quest for peace was not a single moment or a single place, but an ongoing journey, a process of slowing down, of reconnecting with what was always there. He had been searching for something beyond himself, something that would make him feel whole, and yet the forest had revealed to him that wholeness already existed within him. It was simply a matter of listening, of letting go of the noise that so often drowned out the still voice within. The path ahead was familiar, but it felt new. With each step, Evan felt his connection to the forest and to himself growing stronger. The deeper he ventured into the woods, the more he realized that there was no destination to reach, only a path to follow, and that path would unfold in its own time. The call of the forest. As Evan continued to walk, he noticed how the forest seemed to shift around him. The trees, which had felt so distant before, now seemed to lean in, their branches reaching down like welcoming arms. The soft rustling of the leaves in the wind was no longer just a background sound. It was a language that Evan was beginning to understand. He paused for a moment, feeling a slight pull at his heart. It wasn't a feeling of longing or sadness, but rather an intense, quiet knowing. The forest was calling to him, not to lead him somewhere new, but to remind him of what he had forgotten. It was as if the forest was offering him a mirror, a reflection of his own inner world. He closed his eyes and stood still for a moment, just breathing, letting the air fill his lungs, letting the sounds of the forest wash over him. The wind brushed through the trees, the branches swaying in harmony. Every part of the forest was moving, alive with energy, but it moved at its own pace, with no rush, no urgency. It was a perfect reflection of the balance Evan sought. When he opened his eyes again, he saw the forest differently. He was no longer just a visitor passing through, he was part of it. The same way the leaves swayed with the breeze, Evan felt the shift within himself. He was no longer seeking peace. It had always been there. He had simply needed to remember. A return to the heart. As he continued his walk back toward the village, Evan realized how much he had changed, even in the short time since he had entered the forest. He had come seeking something, a way to quiet his mind, a way to find balance, and in the process, he had uncovered something much deeper, a connection to himself and to the world around him. The forest had shown him that peace didn't come from achieving or completing a journey. It came from being present, from accepting the present moment without resistance. It came from breathing deeply, from listening to the subtle sounds of nature, and from allowing the rhythms of the earth to align with his own. The morning was breaking, and the sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the horizon. The light was gentle at first, filtering through the trees in soft golden rays. Evan stopped for a moment, standing in the light of the dawn, feeling its warmth on his face. He closed his eyes and tilted his head back, absorbing the light, the warmth, the quiet stillness, the dawn of new beginnings. This moment, as the forest slowly shifted from night to day, Evan realized that this was not the end of his journey. It was only the beginning. The peace he had discovered, the connection he had forged, would stay with him. He didn't need to wait for another moment or another place to feel at peace. It was already here, already within him, just waiting to be acknowledged. He opened his eyes and began walking again, this time with a sense of lightness, a sense of purpose. The world had shifted, but not in a dramatic way. It wasn't a sweeping transformation. It was more like the soft light of dawn, slow, subtle, and quietly beautiful. He knew that as he returned to his daily life, the forest would always be with him. Its lessons would stay within him, guiding him through the challenges of the world with the same peace he had found in the woods. As he neared the edge of the forest, Evan paused once more, looking back at the trees and the path he had traveled. The forest stood silent, still, but alive with energy. It had shared its peace with him, and now it was time for him to take that peace with him into the world. Part 6. The morning awakening, the return to the village. Evan stepped back onto the well-worn path that led him home. The warmth of the sun had slowly begun to replace the cool shadows of the forest, and the sky was now a soft blue, the first rays of the morning spilling over the horizon. The birds, now awake and chirping loudly, filled the air with their songs. Evan could hear the faint rustling of the leaves, still gently swaying from the wind of the night. But there was a new energy in the air now, one that seemed to hum with possibility. As he walked toward the village, Evan couldn't help but reflect on everything he had just experienced. The forest had offered him peace, a chance to reconnect with something deeper than he had ever known. But now, as the world around him began to wake up, he faced the challenge of returning to his everyday life. The village, with its familiar sights and sounds, awaited him. But as he walked, Evan didn't feel the usual rush or anxiety that had once accompanied his return to routine. The forest had taught him something vital. It had shown him that peace wasn't something he could just visit and leave behind. It wasn't a fleeting moment of tranquility, was something that could be carried with him, nurtured and cultivated in the face of the world around him. The quiet strength of the morning. The village was waking up slowly. He could hear the soft clatter of pots and pans from houses as people began to start their daily routines. The air was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread, and the distant hum of conversations drifted from homes nearby. As Evan entered the village square, he could see the familiar faces of his neighbors, people he had known all his life. Some were tending to their gardens, others were starting their work in the market, and the children ran past him, laughing and chasing each other. Despite the peacefulness of the village, Evan noticed something. The world here, while quieter than the chaos of the city, still buzzed with its own demands. People were moving with purpose, hurrying between tasks, engaged in the routine of life. The market stalls were already being set up. The horses were being readied for the day's work, and there was a quiet sense of urgency in the air. It reminded Evan of how he used to feel, always moving, always rushing to the next task, the next project, the next obligation. But today, something was different. The peace he had found in the forest was still with him, like a gentle breeze that followed him wherever he went. He felt calm, centered, like he was moving through the world with intention, not getting swept up in the busyness of it all. As he walked past his neighbors, he greeted them with a warmth that felt different, deeper than before. A glimpse of the old routine of Evan reached his small home at the edge of the village, the same one he had lived in for years. The familiar wooden door creaked as he pushed it open, and the warm scent of his house filled his senses. Dusty wood, the lingering scent of last night's meal, and the faint aroma of herbs drying by the window. It was quiet inside, and for a moment he simply stood there, letting the stillness envelop him. The forest was still fresh in his mind, the sounds of the stream, the feeling of the cool air on his skin, the calm that had seeped into every part of him. He knew that the world outside would continue to pull him in all directions, but now he felt prepared. He had learned something important in the forest. The key to peace wasn't to escape. The world it was to stay connected to it while remaining grounded in yourself. He set his bag down on the wooden table by the door and moved toward the small kitchen. It was still early, but the day would begin soon. He had work to do, tasks to attend to, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't worried about getting everything done in time. He felt the urge to move at his own pace, to take things one step at a time. Facing the demands of the day, Evan spent the next few hours tending to the simple chores that made up his daily life. He checked his garden, pulled weeds, and watered the plants, each action steady and deliberate. He worked with his hands, feeling the earth beneath his fingers, letting the rhythm of the task bring him back to a sense of grounding. He noticed how his mind wasn't as cluttered as it usually was. Normally, he would be thinking about 100 different things at once: work, relationships, worries about the future. But today, as he worked, his mind felt clear. He was present in the moment, focusing on the task at hand, without the usual distractions. After a while, Evan took a break and sat on the wooden bench in front of his house. He looked out at the village, watching the people pass by. There was a quiet energy in the air, and for the first time, he felt a sense of peace in the midst of the busyness. He was no longer trying to escape the demands of his life. He was learning how to live within them with a sense of calm that came from being rooted in the present. As he sat there, a neighbor waved to him from across the street, and Evan smiled, waving back. It was a simple exchange, but it felt significant. There was no rush, no urgency, only the quiet acknowledgement of another person, another human being moving through the same world. The mind's quiet. Later that afternoon, after finishing his work, Evan decided to take a walk around the village, just as he had walked through the forest. He took his time, moving slowly, observing the small details around him, the way the sunlight fell across the cobblestones, the laughter of children playing in the square, the soft murmur of the market vendors calling out to passers-by. The more Evan walked, the more he realized how much he had been missing by rushing through his days. He had spent so much of his life focused on what came next, always thinking ahead to the next task or the next responsibility. But now, walking slowly through the village, he saw everything more clearly: each person, each conversation, each small moment of life. It was as though the world had always been this beautiful, but he had never allowed himself to notice. He found himself returning to the small park near the village center, where a single tree stood in the center of a grassy circle. It was an old oak, its branches heavy with leaves, its roots deep in the earth. Evan sat down beneath the tree, feeling the cool shade and the soft grass beneath him. The park was quiet, just like the forest, and for a moment, he allowed himself to close his eyes and simply listen. The soft rustle of the leaves in the wind, the chirping of birds overhead, and the distant sounds of life going on around him all blended into a single, harmonious symphony. And in that moment, Evan knew that he had found something far more important than peace. He had found a way to live with the world, not in opposition to it. He didn't need to fight the noise or the demands of life. He just needed to find his center, to be present in the moments, to let them flow through him without resistance. A new understanding. The more Evan sat there, the more he realized how deeply connected he was to everything around him. The peace he had discovered in the forest wasn't a temporary escape, it was a truth that ran through the heart of the world. He was part of that world, as much as the trees, the stream, and the wind. And if he could stay present, if he could learn to move with the flow of life, rather than against it. He could find peace in every moment. No matter what was happening around him, he stood up, feeling lighter than he had in years. The village around him, though still bustling with life, no longer felt overwhelming. He had found a way to live within it, to take each moment as it came, and to remain grounded in the stillness within. Part 7. The reflection, the quiet return to life. Evan woke early the next morning. The familiar sound of birds singing from outside his window greeting him as he stretched his legs and sat up in bed. The sunlight poured into his small room, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. It felt as if the new day had arrived with a quiet promise, a continuation of the peace he had found during his time in the forest. The calm he had experienced there had lingered, settling into his bones, and he could still feel its presence as if it had become a part of him. However, today was not going to be like yesterday. Today, he would face the reality of returning to his normal life, with its demands and distractions. The peace he had found was still within him, but the outside world had a way of pulling at him, urging him to hurry, to act, to react. He knew that he would have to actively hold onto the stillness and the clarity he had found. Evan sat quietly for a moment, letting the morning sun bathe him in warmth. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that his journey hadn't ended in the forest. It was not simply about escaping the noise of life. It was about learning how to move through the world while staying anchored in the present, in the calmness that had so generously been offered to him. Facing the challenges as Evan prepared for the day ahead, the reality of his obligations began to sink in. He had a list of tasks to complete, repairs for the village homes, some deliveries to make, and a few things he'd promised his neighbors. There was no room for delay, no time to sit idly by in the peaceful comfort of the forest. The world, with all of its demands, awaited him. He couldn't help but feel a little overwhelmed by the thought of returning to his usual pace. The peacefulness he had experienced during his time alone in the forest felt fragile now, as if it might shatter under the weight of his busy life. The question that lingered in his mind was, how could he bring this sense of stillness into the everyday bustle of his village life? Evan made his way through his morning routine, but this time, he was aware. He noticed the way his hands moved as he prepared his simple breakfast, the way the sun danced on the surface of the water he poured, the soft sounds of his home settling into the day. It was easy to get lost in the minutiae of the morning, but Evan kept bringing himself back to the present moment. He focused on the act of preparing his meal, savoring each moment as if it, too, were a part of the quiet rhythm he had found in the forest. But as soon as he stepped out into the village, the energy shifted. The bustling sounds of the market reached his ears, and he saw the hurried footsteps of people moving from one place to the next. Children were running, laughing, chasing one another, and the clink of tools and carts echoed in the streets. The village, with its lively energy, had not changed. But Evan felt different, now more aware of the pace of life, more attuned to how quickly people rushed through their days. He couldn't help but notice how he used to live in the same frantic rhythm, always moving, always planning, always trying to get to the next thing, the next goal, the next task. It was easy to get caught up in the noise, the rush. But today, Evan was determined to hold on to his peace. The struggle of re-entry. Evan worked throughout the morning, fixing fences, delivering supplies, and helping his neighbors. He found that the rhythm of life here was different from the stillness he had experienced in the forest. The village had its own pulse, a constant, steady beat of activity that seemed to call for his attention. At first, it felt overwhelming, like the demands of the world were tugging at him, trying to pull him back into the whirlwind of everyday life. But instead of fighting the flow, Evan began to notice something important. The rhythm of life here wasn't necessarily the enemy of peace, was just another form of life, moving in its own way. The trick wasn't to avoid the pace of the world, but to move within it, to stay grounded in the present moment. Even as the world continued to swirl around him, he found that when he focused on each task, whether it was fixing a fence post or carrying a bundle of firewood, he could still maintain his sense of calm. It wasn't about doing everything perfectly or hurrying through the tasks. It was about being present in each moment, engaging with the task at hand, and finding peace in the simple act of being fully immersed in whatever he was doing. The quiet awareness of life. By midday, Evan had completed all his chores for the day. He had delivered supplies to his neighbors, helped them with small tasks, and tended to his garden. The work had been steady and fulfilling, but it was the small moments in between, when he took a pause, when he stood still to listen to the birds, when he breathed deeply and allowed himself to feel the earth beneath him, that reminded him of the quiet peace he had found. He sat on the porch of his house for a while, watching the villagers go about their business. There was a certain rhythm to it, all the market, the children playing, the older folks chatting on the street corner. It was the same rhythm that had always existed here, but Evan now saw it with a new lens, one that wasn't clouded by hurry or anxiety. He saw the beauty in the simple interactions, in the shared moments between people. Evan realized that peace wasn't about seeking isolation or avoiding the world. It was about embracing the world in all its forms, both the quiet moments and the noisy ones. It was about learning how to flow with the rhythm of life without losing yourself in the chaos. And in that realization, Evan felt a deeper sense of gratitude. The power of presence. The afternoon wore on, and Evan found himself walking back through the village, this time with a sense of calm that he hadn't felt before. The same village, the same people, the same routines, but this time he was different. He moved through the day with purpose, but not with urgency. He was aware of the little things, the small smiles exchanged with neighbors, the laughter of the children, the feel of the sun on his face. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't trying to get anywhere. He was simply walking through life, letting it unfold in its own time. And with each step, Evan felt more connected to everything around him. The forest hadn't taught him to escape life, had taught him how to engage with it fully. Without getting lost in the distractions, Evan knew that there would be moments of struggle, moments when the peace he had found would be tested. But he also knew that he now had the tools to stay grounded, to find his way back to himself in the midst of the world. He had learned that peace was not a destination, but a way of being, a state of mind that could be carried with him, no matter where life took him. Part 8. The call to return. Returning to the world. The sun had risen high, casting golden light through the trees and over the village streets. The hustle and bustle of daily life surrounded Evan, but today something was different. The hum of activity in the village square felt lighter, less burdensome. There were still chores to be done, still conversations to be had, but Evan no longer felt the familiar urgency to rush, to complete things as quickly as possible. He had learned, over the course of his journey, that the process of living was just as important as the result. As he moved through the village, Evan felt a quiet shift within himself. The moments of calm that had once seemed elusive were now a part of him, nestled in his thoughts and in his heart. It was as though he carried the peace of the forest with him wherever he went. It was there when he greeted his neighbors, when he worked in his garden, when he ran errands in the village square. Yet, Evan knew there were still aspects of his life, particularly with the people around him, that he had yet to truly integrate his newfound sense of peace into. His relationships, the things that required his attention and emotional investment, remained complicated. And although he had gained a sense of inner peace, there were still moments when that peace was tested, especially by the people he loved and cared about most. Evan could already feel the pull of his old habits, the impatience with himself and others, the tendency to react quickly, and the desire to withdraw when things became difficult. He had learned how to find peace in solitude, in nature, but now he was facing the challenge of bringing that peace into the most challenging aspect of life, his relationships. The tension with others, the first test, came when Evan visited his neighbor, old Thomas, who was a gruff man with a sharp tongue and little patience for those who didn't meet his expectations. Old Thomas had always been a part of Evan's life, but their interactions had often been strained. Evan had always felt that Thomas judged him for not being more like others, more outspoken, more assertive, more driven. As Evan approached the small cottage where Thomas lived, he felt a familiar tightening in his chest. The nerves that came from facing someone who didn't always make him feel welcome began to surface. But then he stopped. He breathed in the air, reminded himself of the peace he had found, and reminded himself that he could approach this moment with patience and clarity. He knocked gently on the door, and moments later, Thomas opened it with a gruff grunt. "Ah, Evan," he said, narrowing his eyes, "what brings you by?" "I thought I'd stop in and see how you were doing," Evan said, keeping his tone calm, not rushing his words. "Is there anything you need help with today?" Thomas grumbled, but stepped aside, allowing Evan to enter. The small room smelled of wood smoke and tea, and Thomas's cane leaned against the wall by the fire. As Evan helped Thomas gather some firewood, he felt his nerves start to dissipate. This wasn't about impressing anyone. This was simply a moment of connection, a chance to show kindness without expectation. As they worked together in silence, Evan reflected on how easy it had once been for him to let others' moods dictate his own. He had often let his unease with Thomas's critical attitude turn into irritation, but today he could see the old man with different eyes. Thomas wasn't trying to make Evan feel small. He was simply a man who, like everyone else, was carrying his own burdens. And perhaps, just as Evan was learning to bring peace to his own life, Thomas was struggling with his own challenges. They finished the task in quiet companionship, and as Evan prepared to leave, Thomas placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thanks for the help, Evan," Thomas said, his tone softer now, his voice tinged with an unfamiliar warmth. "You've got a way about you, more patient than I remember." Evan smiled and nodded, feeling the weight of the conversation settle into him. There had been no argument, no sharp words exchanged, just an unspoken understanding. And in that moment, Evan realized that peace wasn't just something he could carry within himself. It was something that, when shared with others, had the power to soften even the hardest hearts. The strain with family later that afternoon, Evan visited his sister, Clara. Clara had always been a source of support for him, but their relationship had its own complexities. They had grown up together, but as adults, they had drifted apart in subtle ways. Clara was much more pragmatic and straightforward than Evan, and she often seemed frustrated by his more reflective nature. Where he found peace in quiet moments, she sought action and movement. Their differences had always been a source of tension, but Evan hoped that, after everything he had learned, he could approach their relationship with new eyes. When he arrived at her small home on the outskirts of the village, Clara greeted him with a quick hug and a smile, but there was something guarded in her expression. "Good to see you," she said, her voice pleasant but slightly strained. "How have you been?" Evan smiled, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "I've been well. I've spent a lot of time reflecting, just slowing down a bit. And you?" Clara hesitated, crossing her arms as she leaned against the doorframe. "Busy, as always," she replied. "You know how it is. The children need me, the house needs me, and there's always something that needs fixing. I don't have time for reflection, Evan." Evan could feel the tension building in the air, and he wanted to respond, to explain how he had found a new sense of balance, but he knew that wouldn't help. Clara wasn't asking for his advice, nor was she ready to hear it. Instead, he decided to simply listen, to meet her where she was. "You know, sometimes I think you spend too much time taking care of everyone else," he said gently, choosing his words carefully. "What about you? Are you taking time for yourself?" Clara's eyes flickered with something like irritation. "I don't have the luxury of time, Evan," she snapped. "You always had the time to reflect, to wander off into the woods. I have responsibilities. I don't get to walk away from them." Evan's heart ached as he looked at her. He understood the weight she carried, and yet he couldn't help but wish she could see that there was peace to be found, even in the middle of those responsibilities. He wanted to tell her that peace wasn't about escaping, wasn't about running away. It was about finding stillness within the whirlwind. But he knew now was not the time. Instead, he softened his gaze and said quietly, "I know you carry a lot, but I also know you've always been stronger than you think. Sometimes, taking a moment for yourself doesn't mean abandoning everyone. It means you're better able to show up for them." Clara didn't respond right away. Her eyes softened for a brief moment, and then she looked down, as though considering his words. She didn't need to say anything. Evan could see the shift. In her eyes, the unexpected pieces. Evan left Clara's house. He realized how much the moment had shifted him. It wasn't that he had resolved anything with her, it was that he had learned to be present with her, just as he had with the forest. The peace he had found in the woods wasn't a final destination. It was a lens through which he could see and interact with the world more fully. And that included his family, with all its complexities and challenges. He walked back through the village, feeling the weight of his conversation with Clara and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that peace didn't have to be an isolated experience. It could be shared, nurtured, and cultivated through the simplest of interactions. Part 9. The Harmony Restored. Finding balance in chaos, Evan awoke the next morning with a quiet resolve. His conversation with Clara and his interactions with his neighbors the day before had opened a new chapter in his journey. The peace he had discovered in the forest was no longer just an abstract concept, had become something tangible, something he could call upon even in the midst of the busyness of village life. But he also knew that this peace, though deeply rooted within him, would be tested. Life, with all its unpredictability and demands, had a way of pulling him out of his center. He had come to realize that the real challenge wasn't in escaping the chaos of life, was in learning to coexist with it, finding harmony even when the world around him was in constant motion. The forest had taught him about quiet, solitude, and reflection, but it was the village, with its noise, its urgency, and its demands, that would truly test his ability to maintain inner peace. As he stood by his window, looking out at the waking world, Evan knew that today would bring its own challenges. He would need to go to the market, help his neighbors, and work on his own small projects. But he wasn't approaching the day with a sense of urgency or resistance. For the first time in a long time, he felt prepared to meet whatever came his way, not by running from it, but by moving through it with intention and calm. The tensions in the village, as always, was full of life. The early morning sounds of the market being set up, children playing, and the occasional burst of laughter filled the air. But even amidst the vibrant activity, Evan could feel the undercurrent of tension. There were whispers of disagreements among the villagers, a few long-standing issues between families, and some dissatisfaction about the pace of life and the future. As he walked through the square, he overheard bits and pieces of conversations that spoke of frustration and impatience. The atmosphere, though not overtly hostile, felt charged, as if everyone was struggling to find a sense of peace in their own way. Evan couldn't help but feel the weight of this. The peace he had discovered in his own heart wasn't something that could be simply imposed on others. He had learned that true peace wasn't about controlling or changing the external world. It was about changing his relationship to it. And in this moment, he understood that he needed to extend that same understanding to the people around him. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath as he absorbed the energy of the village. He realized that while peace could be found in quiet moments, it could also be found in the spaces between people, between conversations, between tasks, between movements. It was a matter of being present, of listening, of connecting without judgment. A difficult conversation, Evan's thoughts were interrupted when he came across Daniel, a young man from the village who had always been quick to voice his opinions and frustrations. Daniel was in the middle of an animated discussion with a few other villagers about the direction the village was taking. There was a sense of anger in his voice, and Evan could see the frustration written all over his face. "Things are changing too fast around here," Daniel was saying, his voice loud and sharp. "The way we've always done things isn't good enough anymore. People are too focused on what they can't change and not enough on what needs to be done." Evan approached slowly, quietly, not wanting to disrupt the conversation, but wanting to offer a moment of calm. When Daniel saw him, he paused, but the tension didn't leave his posture. Instead of offering a hasty comment or advice, Evan simply asked, "What's bothering you, Daniel?" Daniel looked at him for a moment, as though weighing whether to continue, but then his frustration spilled out. "I'm tired, Evan. Tired of watching everything around me change without having any say in it. The world feels like it's moving faster than I can keep up with." Evan listened carefully, his gaze calm, but his heart felt the weight of Daniel's words. He could relate to the feeling of being caught in the current of change, of struggling to find a foothold when the world around you seemed to be spinning too quickly. But instead of offering a solution, Evan chose to hold space for Daniel's feelings. He didn't try to fix it or rush the conversation. He simply listened. When Daniel had finished speaking, Evan nodded gently. "I understand," he said. "Change can be overwhelming. But sometimes, in the middle of all that change, it's helpful to slow down for just a moment, to pause, breathe, and be present with what is, even if it feels hard." Daniel didn't respond right away, but there was a shift in his expression. The tightness in his face relaxed, just a little. He didn't have all the answers, and Evan didn't expect him to. But sometimes, just knowing someone else saw you and understood your frustration was enough to create a crack in the wall of resistance. A quiet moment of understanding as the day continued. Evan's thoughts returned to the conversation with Daniel. He realized that peace wasn't about offering quick fixes to the world's problems. It was about creating space for people to express their frustrations and, in doing so, allowing them to find their own path toward healing. Evan couldn't change the village or its pace, but he could show up with the quiet strength that the forest had taught him, offering presence and understanding where it was needed most. Later in the evening, as the sun began to set, Evan sat outside his home, looking at the village in the distance. The day had been filled with noise, conversations, tasks, and interruptions, but there had been moments of clarity amid it all. The quiet, reflective moments when he remembered the peace he carried within, when he allowed himself to simply be, without rushing or expecting anything. The harmony he had sought in the forest was not something to be found only in isolation, was something that could be created anywhere, in any moment, even amidst the challenges of daily life. It was about learning to balance the noise with the silence, the movement with stillness, and the outside world with the quiet inner space that had become his refuge. A new perspective as the stars began to twinkle in the sky above. Evan realized that his journey had led him to a deeper understanding of himself and the world around him. The village, once a place of noise and chaos, now felt like a part of the greater whole, a tapestry of life that was both complex and simple, noisy and still. He had learned to move through it all with presence, to engage with the world around him without losing himself in it. Evan knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more moments when the peace he had worked so hard to find would be tested, but now he felt equipped to handle them. He had learned that peace was not an endpoint, but a continuous process, a way of being that required constant practice and mindfulness. And in that practice, he knew he would continue to find the harmony he had sought, both within himself and in the world around him. As he gazed up at the night sky, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The moon, which had been his guide in the forest, now seemed to watch over him once again, offering its gentle light to illuminate his path. He smiled softly, knowing that, no matter what came next, he was ready to meet it with the same quiet strength he had found under the canopy of the forest. Part 10. The end of the journey, the final stretch of the path as the days passed. Evan began to realize something important. His journey, while profoundly transformative, had never been about reaching a final destination. He had thought at first that peace was something to be attained, a place to get to, a goal to accomplish. But as he sat quietly one evening, watching the sunset spill across the village, he understood that peace was not a destination at all. It was a journey of living each moment, of being present, of staying grounded no matter what life threw at him. The lessons he had learned in the forest, the stillness he had found in nature, had shaped him into someone more aware of his surroundings, more connected to himself and the people around him. It wasn't about achieving perfection. It was about learning how to move through the ups and downs of life with grace and balance. His inner peace was not a shield to protect him from life's struggles, but a foundation that allowed him to stand firm even in the midst of them. He had made peace with the chaos of the world, and understood that it was an essential part of life. It wasn't about escaping the noise, It was about learning to find stillness within the noise, and in that he had found freedom. Freedom from the constant pressure to be somewhere else, to do something else, to become someone else. Evan was exactly where he needed to be, and that in itself was enough. Reflections by the fire one evening after a long day of work, Evan found himself sitting outside, staring into the flickering flames of a fire he had built in the small stone pit behind his house. The warmth from the fire was comforting against the cool evening air. The sky above was dotted with stars, and the village was quiet, with only the occasional sound of laughter or conversation drifting in from a neighbor's home. Everything felt still, yet alive. Evan had spent so much time thinking about how to find peace. But now he realized that peace wasn't something that needed to be found. It was something that had always been there, within him. It was the natural state of the world, the rhythm of life itself. What he had been seeking all along had been waiting for him to notice it. He thought back to his time in the forest, to the quiet stream that had taught him the importance of patience, to the moonlit nights that had shown him the power of stillness. But he also thought of the village, the bustling streets, the endless tasks, the relationships that were both challenging and fulfilling. His life here, surrounded by the people he cared about, had its own kind of beauty. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. The fire crackled in the quiet night, and Evan smiled softly to himself. He had always thought of peace as something distant, something to strive for, but now he understood. It wasn't something you achieved, it was something you allowed. It was about being fully present in each moment, accepting things as they were, and not resisting the flow of life. Life, with all its ups and downs, was a journey, and peace was the companion that walked alongside him. A visit from Clara the following day. Clara came by for a visit. It had been a while since they had truly talked, and Evan could feel the shift in their relationship. There was a softness in her that hadn't been there before, a willingness to listen, a space where there had once been tension. They sat together on the porch, the warmth of the sun beginning to dip behind the hills as the evening approached. Clara, as always, was busy with her work, but today she seemed to have more time to simply be with him. Evan noticed the way her eyes softened when she spoke, as though she was not only listening to his words, but to the silence between them. As well, you've been different lately, Clara said quietly, her voice thoughtful. There's a calmness about you now, something that wasn't there before. Evan smiled, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. I've been trying to slow down, Clara, to be more present. It's strange how easy it is to get lost in everything, to forget that just being here is enough. Clara looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching, as if she was trying to understand something deeper within him. I can see that. It's like you found a way to carry the peace you talk about, even when the world keeps spinning round you. Evan nodded. It's not about avoiding the chaos or running away. It's about learning how to be in it without losing myself. The world is always moving, always changing, but I've realized that peace isn't something I need to chase. It's already here, inside of me. Clara didn't respond immediately, but there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She didn't say much more, but Evan could feel the quiet understanding between them. In that moment, he knew that their relationship was shifting, slowly but surely. They were both learning how to be present with each other, without judgment, without expectation, just being, and that was enough. The rhythm of life the next few weeks were filled with moments of quiet reflection and meaningful interactions. Evan continued with his daily routines, helping his neighbors, tending to his garden, and working on his small projects. But he no longer viewed them as tasks to be completed. They were part of the dance of life's small, simple movements that connected him to the world around him. He spent more time with his neighbors, not rushing through conversations, but allowing space for them to speak, to share their lives. He found that when he was truly present with them, they too began to open up in ways they hadn't before. It was as if the calm he carried within him was contagious, and slowly the village seemed to reflect that. People spoke with more patience, listened more intently, and shared in a way that felt deeper, more connected. That the small moments of peace Evan had discovered in the forest had slowly woven themselves into the fabric of his everyday life, and though the world around him continued to move, continued to be loud and chaotic at times, he no longer felt out of sync with it. He moved with it, not against it. And in doing so, he found that he could carry the tranquility of the forest with him wherever he went. Looking toward the future one evening, as Evan walked through the village after finishing his work, he stopped by the stream that ran just outside the village limits. The moon was full, casting its silvery light across the water, and the air was cool and still. He stood there for a while, letting the quiet of the moment wash over him. He thought about the journey he had taken, the forest, the village, the lessons learned, the relationships healed. It had all come together in a way he hadn't expected. The peace he had sought had never been about escaping life, but about embracing it fully, with all its complexities, its joys, and its struggles. As he stood by the water, Evan knew that the journey was not over. Life would continue to unfold, and he would continue to walk his path. There would be moments of stillness and moments of chaos. There would be times when his peace would be tested. But now he felt equipped to meet them all. He was no longer searching for peace as something to be attained. He understood now that peace was not a destination. It was a way of being, a way of living in the world without losing yourself. He took a deep breath and smiled to himself. The path ahead was still unknown, but for the first time, Evan felt truly ready to face it.